Hi, Body of Messiah. Today we're going to cover part 3 of lesson 15, the title of Those Who Hold to the Teachings of Balaam or Balaam, taken from Revelation chapter 2, verse 14 through 16. I hope you've had a chance and opportunity to look at part 2 and part 1 because we're not going to go into details about Balaam. If you want to know more details about him, go look up UBP Lesson 7, where we talk about the third congregation named Pergamum. But briefly, the sin of Balaam is that he was a prophet or seer who, because he desired money more than doing what was right in the eyes of the Most High God, he thought of a deceptive way of tricking the descendants of Israel, of bonding with Baal through sexual immorality. Ultimately, Balaam was put to death because of his actions. Because when those descendants of Israel who were deceived bond with Balaam, they end up dying. Okay? And what we're trying to be clear about is those who hold to the teachings of Balaam and how we can distance ourselves and keep away from that. This practice of no matter what, just for the sake of money, that some people who are anointed with the gifts that God had given them would choose to intentionally place stumbling blocks before the descendants of Israel and the whole body of Messiah, for instance, okay? God is warning the congregations about this, and this third congregation specifically. So various congregations probably have engaged in this particular activity where some of the leadership, because of the sake of money, would desire to skip over certain details, biblical truths, and God's standards so that they won't offend certain people for the love of money that is being donated to their congregation. Um, I want to hold up this chart that I had done in the previous lesson so we can reacclimate ourselves to what our focus is about. And this was the little diagram that I had where I'm showing you where the structure of a family, right, with one child. And you can substitute child with children if you like. But what I'm doing here is showing that there's a mother and a father and that there's a child in the middle, okay? And as you can see from this little chart, you see that the blue dots represents all the male figures surrounding this child's life, no matter if they come from the father's side or the mother's side. And the green dots are the women that are integral to their life, okay? Now, depending on how stable that circle of influence is, if it's bad or negative, then the child could go into a lifestyle of promiscuity if it's negative, okay? Whether it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual abuse, it could be verbal abuse, neglect, and just being mistreated. And then they can go from a life of promiscuity to an arena of confusion here. This layer where I'm documenting trans, bisexual, gay, that arena. And I mean for a child specifically, okay? Then I also highlight down here are these workers of iniquity. I tried to correct my little apostrophe here. But these workers of iniquity on this outside realm is what we're trying to keep everyone from. I don't care if you identify as a grown person as being trans, bi, or gay, or anybody above, promiscuous, or anything. Workers of iniquity seek to destroy and kill anyone that's not in their circle. They desire to pull them down and destroy them. They're under demonic influences and they desire to serve Satan. So I want us to all be clear on this. This is what our fight is against. And the best way for us to combat from being pulled into an arena where a worker of iniquity could get a hold of us or try to, workers of iniquities are those who intentionally go against God's standards and command. They have no regard for it. So today we're going to go into further detail with covering a few more examples of workers of iniquity. And this lesson is going to be a little rough because we're going to cover some of the cruel, wicked things, briefly what they've done. We're not going to go into extreme detail, but it's just going to be kind of rough. Workers of iniquity who feel like they're doing the right hand job, being the right hand person of Satan, don't care about anyone or anything. They don't care about orientation. So we have to be so cautious of that. And we have to make sure that we're on a firm foundation of abiding by what the standards of the Torah are when it comes to sexual immorality. Today, I want to make sure that as we cover the aspect of what Balaam did, how he was able to deceive the descendants of Israel of bonding with Baal, I want to cover a couple of more scriptures that are associated with the descendants of Israel, my ancestors, when they went that way of idol worship, Baal worship. You see, these idols are worthless, useless, but because people who are under the influence of the demonic and desire to serve this side and intentionally go against God's standard, they will have people entertaining the demonic, mocking them, mistreating them, and also getting them to destroy their family and their children. Okay? So I'm going to share some scriptures to show how vital this was and how detrimental it is for us to rear our children at that stage as a child in the proper way. It's very vital that we teach them the standards of the Most High God. Okay? And be upfront and open about our failures and our flaws. This is the only way that we can build firm foundations so that our children know, even if they do slip up and they go a way that goes against God's standard, that there's always redemption for them. See, God does not specialize in creating human beings so he can discard them and get rid of them because they've broken some of the standards and statutes. There's a way and a path for redemption. That's why our Messiah, when he was here in flesh, died for our sins. And Adonai Elohim made a way for that. But I want to share these scriptures with you so you'll understand how hurtful it was for the Most High God. The first scripture I'm going to share is 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 16 through 17. And this scripture reads, "So they abandoned all the mitzvot of Adonai their God. They made for themselves molten images, 2 calves and made an Asherah pole, and bowed down to all the hosts of heaven, and worshipped Baal. They made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire, practiced divination and enchantment, and sold themselves to do evil in Adonai's eyes." So notice that, going against God's mitzvah, his command, selling themselves to do evil in Adonai's eyes. These things right here are evil practices. And practices that you're doing in vain to glorify things that are of the demonic or worthless metal, iron, gold, wooden idols. Just going against God's standard. And he talks about how they made their sons and daughters pass through the fire. This is a part of idol worship. And it's something that God has never required of us. It's something that he does not approve of. The next scripture I'm going to share is Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 20 and 21. And in it says, verse 20, "You took your sons and your daughters, whom you bore for me, and sanctified them." And you can go and read the rest of verse 20, but it deals with cannibalism, okay? Verse 21, "You slaughtered my children, making them pass through the fire for them." Them meaning those worthless idols, the demonic. Entertaining them. This was hurtful. God sees these children and the way they're being nurtured as his. You bore them for him. So we have to do our best to nurture them. Now, I want us to focus on Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 14, because a lot of people don't realize that in that scripture, we see our Messiah talking about situations in which those people who despise children and do wrong to them are workers of iniquity. Okay? And he makes statements like, for those who intentionally harm the children or do wrong, it is best for a millstone to be wrapped around their neck and them to be cast off into the water, to the sea. And he talks about specifically things that are associated with, I believe personally, because he's specifically talking about those who harm children, activity that a person may be tempted to engage in. He makes a statement like, if your eyes offend you, pluck them out. If your hand offends you, chop it off. Now, we know we're not going to chop off our hand and pluck out our eyes, but he's talking about the gateway of where most of these atrocities begin to happen, by entering the mind. And if, say, for instance, what we're going to talk about today are some workers of iniquity who were on the side, this satanic pull, for the most part. One claimed that he, got saved and was redeemed, but he went back that way of pulling people against the Most High God by working intentionally against his command. But these men specialize in pornographic images. And when you look at Matthew chapter 18, this is what our Messiah is talking about: offending and harming children. When a person saturates their mind with things like that, images, pornographic images, it distorts their view of God's standards, specifically when it comes to a relationship, husband and wife, and marriage. Okay? God created sex for marriage. He has a standard for that between man and woman. He has standards that he laid out in Leviticus chapter 18 in the Torah and 23. Leviticus 18, he goes into detail, and our Most High God is saying, you should never uncover the nakedness of your children, your family, or even in-laws. So our Most High God was clear on that when it comes to the Brit Hadashah and when it comes to the Torah. Now, I'm going to share how these workers of iniquity, they did what they did. And I want to share a statistic with you. In America, as far as I know, America, probably other places too, but in America in the 90s, they said 1 out of every 3 children had been violated sexually, molested. Okay? That was in the 90s. So by the 2000s, they said that statistic was 1 in every 2 children. Now, this goes to show you how wicked the United States just alone by itself is. A lot of times people and ministers and ministry will try to project that on other countries where they have idol worship, like, over in India or Singapore, different places where they worship statues and different idols, okay? But America has its own sins to deal with and to reconcile and stop, okay? And war against. Did you know that in the South, in like the 40s, 50s, there used to be laws on the book in southern state, on the books for America, where fathers were allowed to molest their daughters? Yes, on the books. So the people who passed those laws or came up with those laws were working on this side. They were workers of iniquity, okay? Let's be extremely clear on this, okay? Now, I want to share with you a couple of people. And this first one is Hugh Hefner. He was a person who was the creator of Playboy magazine. Hugh Hefner, I think he was married once briefly, but Hugh Hefner was known for having this thing called the Playboy Mansion, where he had a harem of women. And a lot of people would glorify that and his way of being, I guess, like he's some type of Mac Daddy or whatever. But Hugh Hefner, what he would do is get girls that were like 18, 19, as young as that age, and even talk with their family and promise to take care of these young ladies as long as they came and lived at the mansion and be one of his women. Okay? And a lot of people brag about that, okay? But he glorified fornication. That's what he glorified, right? Now, a lot of people want to talk about Epstein and he's a pedophile and what he did. But this right here was sex trafficking also. Just because the women were so called of age and their family agreed, it still was a type of sex trafficking. And it was being glorified in the US as being okay, right? Now I want to share another person with you. Now I want to say this with the Playboy magazine and all these images of pornography, it gives a person the distorted view of God's standard. It goes against his standard. These women and men are getting paid to perform an activity, to pretend. You know how you go watch the Marvels or the different superheroes in the movies, and you see like the Hulk or Superman or the Black Panther, what have you? We know these images are pretend, they're fake, they're graphically enhanced, right? We know this is not reality. And the same goes for the industry of pornography. This next person I'm going to share is named Larry Flint. He used to be a person who created the magazine called The Hustlers. The images for this magazine are very graphic and violent and gives an extreme distorted view of sexuality. Okay? Now, the reason why I'm sharing these particular people as being on the side, intentionally going against the standards of God, is because that's what they did. Larry Flint claimed that he had become saved, what have you, and changed his life, but it was short-lived. There was a serial killer who shot him and paralyzed him from the waist down. And from that point, he was like, I don't believe in God or what have you. Then I think he had another moment where he, was believing in God or basically he believed in the existence of God. He might not have said that he was saved and a changed man, but during one of his last marriages, I think he had about 4 or 5 marriages. And I think next to the last marriage, he had a wife that he really loved, and they were married for about 11 years. But that wife ended up having HIV and ended up dying from it. And so from that point, he was even more rebellious against God. Like, I don't even believe in God. There can't be a God if he allowed this to happen to me. I think it's kind of ironic that when everything is going fine, people are like, oh, don't acknowledge God, don't care. But when the tragedy comes, it's like, God did this to me, Just side note. I think that's ironic. But anyway, he said he no longer believed in Most High God, but these magazines, these images, the industry that is projected out of Hollywood. America is the whore of Babylon, and it's even more reinforced by the fact that Hollywood was the pornographic capital of the world. All these images are projected throughout the world, and they're the biggest producer of it. When you look at people who are in prison for different types of violent rapes, molestation, and things like that, a lot of the source of their thought processing, which entered into that dark side, came from the fact that they saturated themselves with pornography. They saturated their minds with that, and then they start getting these wicked inclinations to do things that were wrong. So by the Messiah, we have to make sure to nurture our children. I'm sure that maybe Larry Flint or Hugh Hefner might have been abused when they were children, what have you. But if they were man enough to work against God's standard, they had to be man enough to fight their way back. There are people who have done that, okay? And they cleave to the Most High God and have become warriors for the Most High God. But that's up to them, not as for us to chase behind them and try and make them change their lives for the better. This is on them and their obligation. And I hope before the end of their life that they had a change of heart or what have you, a come to Yeshua moment, and would have been working for the better side to abide by God's standard, but we don't know. So by the Messiah, we have to make sure that we don't bombard our children with images like that. Look, even when you look at the music industry, I don't care what genre of music, Some people try and act like country is so pure and good, but they're always relationship singing and talking about things that go to a level where you know it's sexualized. And our children can get bombarded with that. Allow our children to be children. They don't have to know everything about this aspect of life until they're reaching teenage and adulthood. And they need to know the basis and the standards based on the Torah, first and foremost, so that they will know what pleases the Most High God. Now, a lot of our children, if they go through these stages of life and they come up and they were abused, a lot of times they struggle. They struggle to come back to this side because their images of things has been distorted because they've been abused and they have a void and they're looking for that attention. So we got to make sure when we look at this structure here that mother and fathers, moms and dads, even if you're not together, do your best to be partners as far as positive rearing in this child or your children's lives. Because I'm going to share with you a survivor of a worker of iniquity here. Her name is Josephina. This woman has a powerful testimony. She probably was abused and neglected when she was young, and she gives her testimony of where she was seeking attention. And her desire to seek attention also pulled her over into a lifestyle of prostitution. Now, in the midst of her in this lifestyle, she ran across this. Let me get y'all close up on it. I already put him down here. This worker of iniquity named Gary Heidnick. This worker of iniquity had killed multiple women, but he was a serial killer rapist who had women captured and chained up and bondage in his basement. And he would do all kinds of torturous things to them. It even involves cannibalism too. So I want you to understand that when people have a lifestyle, they may be seeking attention, they may accidentally get captured by one of these workers of iniquity, and their lives could be taken. And these are the things that when we talk about those who hold to the teaching of Balaam, why it's so vital that we make sure we have a firm foundation. When we call sexual immorality a sin, that's a sin, that's what it is. Even if we partaken in it or currently partaken in it, we do not glorify sexual immorality because of the standards of God are so valuable. He wants us to live our best lives and never get caught up by one of these workers of iniquity that will be seeking to take our lives. My heart goes out to this lady here, and she gives a powerful testimony. I think I'm going to attach a testimony of her in her younger age when she had recently been released from captivity and survived. And you can listen to it, and it's deep, Body of Messiah. I'm just warning you guys ahead of time. She also has gone on the Steve Wilkos show to talk to some young ladies who, a particular young lady that was rebelling against her adopted mother. And she gives that young lady a testimony and explaining that this is what happened to me. I was seeking attention, and I got caught up in a lifestyle of prostitution. And you don't want this because you can run across some true monsters sometimes. Okay? So Josephina, I'll attach her testimony, her video out there so you guys can see it and understand there are actual people who are never to seek their shalom because there are workers of iniquity who intentionally pull you against God's standard in order to destroy you. Okay? Now, another worker of iniquity that I want to share is here. Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, a lot of people know him from being a serial killer who cannibalized people too. But this particular one claims that he, received salvation, after he was captured and in prison. But he ended up dying a horrible death because some other prisoner or convict said God had ordered him to take his life. That's deep. But anyway, before his passing, Jeffrey Dahmer claimed that he had received salvation, and he begins to tell detailed testimony about how he got pulled into this side of iniquity through Satanism. A lot of people in the media will not share that. The newsreels won't share that. But he used to engage in a practice of like an enchantment or what do they call that? Seances. Anyway, he desired in his young adult life to serve Satan. That's what he was getting involved in, desiring to serve Satan. So he began to saturate himself with that, and he began to have these distorted views of things and a mentality. He was basically being overtaken by the demonic. The way he was discovered, the things that he was doing was found, proves to me that yes, he was overtaken by the demonic at one point in time. They said that the smell from his apartment was so foul, the neighbors complained about it. Because what he would do after he get a victim, a male or female prostitute, he specialized mostly in male prostitute, he would kill them, dismember them, and keep some of their dismembered parts, okay, and would eat it. So he would explain how his imagination became so perverse that he desired to do these things. And there's no way you can tell me that human being in their right mind would sit around that type of filth and that type of evil. So he was overtaken. Now, by the end of his life, he claims that, he had received salvation. So that's for God to judge. I'm not judging him, but I'll place him right here. Only God can judge our heart and know for sure, okay? But God provides salvation even for someone who used to be as wicked as this. He certainly has. Now, I want to share another person. And this person is not a worker of iniquity. But this person's name is Norma McCorvey. Sorry about that. And she is Roe from the Roe versus Wade, right? She was the poster child for abortion. Now, we know abortion is a practice of taking the life of an unborn innocent child. But Norma McCorvey, people may be thinking like, oh, she should be a worker of iniquity over here. No, she was just the poster child for what other people desired to do in this country and throughout the world. Is to try and validate taking the lives of innocent children. Now, this particular person here, she later on began to be converted to Catholicism or something. And anyway, she asked for salvation through Yeshua, and she began to work for pro-life and against so-called pro-choice. And workers of iniquity were angry with this woman, angry because she decided to go for the so-called opposing side, where she was against the taking of the lives of unborn children. Now, by the end of her life, she ended up in hospice or something somewhere before she passed away. And one of the reporters that interviewed her claimed that she was just pretending. I don't believe that reporter as far as I can throw them, not unless they got a recorded video. But this lady had changed her life, and she began to war against abortion. She was pro-life. So people's lives can change. Listen, Body Messiah, there are some people that I know that have gotten abortions, and they talk about the fact that they tried to simplify it in their mind and make it seem like a simple procedure. And after it happened, they almost went nutty as fruitcake because they said it would hear a baby scream and cry, and it was tormenting them. And so one thing that God made me realize is that these women who have gone through that particular action have the best living testimony for young women who are contemplating going through with an abortion. God does not discard people in their lives.
These women have the best testimony to a young lady that's troubled out there and trying to make a decision, and they will make clear that you may regret it. But one thing about the abortion industry, too, that I want to mention that I found when I had researched it back in college is that they don't share with you that having an abortion can do damage to the female body, the female baby bed, and even it's a side effect that they found as far as the number of breast cancer cases being on the increase from women at a higher level for women who've had abortions. They don't share that with people in general. They try to ignore that, and because they're working against God's standard, they're trying to simplify a procedure that is extremely complicated. God does not glorify the shedding of innocent blood. I don't care if it's an adult, grown man or woman, or an unborn child. He never glorifies that. There's a price to pay for that. Okay? And these women that have come through that particular ordeal have a living testimony that will help this next generation. So people don't try to discard women who've been through that procedure. I don't say discard anybody. Everybody has an opportunity for redemption. But our main focus and goal is that we have to give our children a fighting chance and a standard to abide by. Now, I'm going to attach a video out here, and I think it's from one of the video streams from Black to Africa. There's a YouTuber out there, and out there he has a video about showing how some of these ministers and priests are tap dancing around the issue of calling sin sin, whether it be the sin of homosexuality and especially fornication and adultery. But specifically, they love to tap dance around whether or not homosexuality is a sin. And the particular minister that's in this video that calls them out about that, his name is Bodhi. And he makes a statement and gives two reasons why they have such a fear. Number one, they're scared they're going to lose some of their financial backing and support. And number two, they don't want to be labeled as somebody who is homophobic, or transphobic or what have you. But I want to add a third layer to that too. The third layer is maybe a lot of them don't want to call these things out, especially when it comes to fornication and adultery, is because they have engaged in those activities, or they may currently be engaging in those activities. Okay, and it's the guilt that overpowers them, right? Now, just from those two alone, they love to focus on homosexuality, but from fornication and adultery alone, a lot of them are like, we may lose our financial support. I don't want to offend nobody. But we ultimately have to make a choice, either abiding by the standards of God, no matter how guilty you feel or might be, or brushing off the standards of God because you fear losing the financial support of man. We have to make that continuous decision. So, Body Messiah, for us as individuals, we have to make sure to nurture our children. Be open and honest with them about our shortfalls and the things that we went through in our younger days. So they'll be aware of God's standard and how, if they do fall short, they're able to come back and be redeemed by the Ruach of Elohim. So, Body Messiah, this was lesson 3, and we're going to move on to lesson 4. Lesson 4 won't be as heavy as lesson 3, but we're going to cover some actual things that we can do in order to keep this foundation secure. Okay? Like I said, we dealt with the imagery and how pornography can negatively affect people. Just keep in mind, pornography is kryptonite to a stable relationship. It's kryptonite to any individual who is seeking to have a healthy life and a healthy mental state. It is the key for making sure when we stay away from pornographic things so that we will have a healthy sexual life and relationship with the person whom we marry. that is kryptonite to any type of situation, any avenue that you look at, is nothing positive about that. So by the Messiah, make sure that we do the best to nurture our children and to keep their mind focused on the Most High and His standards. Don't beat them over the head with scriptures of the Bible, because our Most High God doesn't, beat us constantly over the head with it. We just need to lay out the truth and allow them the opportunity to abide in it. Well, Body Messiah, this is the end of lesson 15, part 3. And I hope you're able to join me for part 4. And like I always say to you, may Adonai Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you, and envelop you all in His shalom peace. Goodbye.